حبوبي بالوصال أنعم علي وجد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. اللهم إني نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. يا الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So just prior to this section, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala Hujjat al-Islam has been speaking about knowledge that is praiseworthy, al-ilm al-mahmud, and knowledge which is blameworthy, al-ilm al-madhmoom. Now, we touched on this in the morning, this idea that you have blameworthy and praiseworthy knowledge. But as I said this morning, that's as a consequence of how we use that knowledge, not knowledge in and of itself. So for instance, if I said that the tree outside has green leaves, that's knowledge. I know the tree has green leaves. It's knowing a thing as it actually is. Or if I said that there's a river that's running behind this cabin, that's an item of knowledge because I'm saying something that accords with the way it actually is in reality. So in that sense, knowledge is just knowing something the way it actually is. It becomes good or it becomes bad, it's praiseworthy or otherwise, depending on what we do with it. For instance, as the Imam mentions, that there's a type of knowledge that one can have that separates a husband from his wife, or a wife from her husband. Now, if someone, God forbid, knew that, that's just knowledge. But if you used it, it becomes blameworthy. Of course, the question is that why on earth would you want to know something like that? But as a pure theoretical idea, if you just happen to know it. So what we can see is that knowledge becomes what it is as a result of a consequence of its deployment. In addition to this, the Imam breaks down a categorization of knowledge based upon what is obligatory upon every Muslim, which he refers to as fard'ain, and which Shaykh Yasser has been speaking about just now, and knowledge that is a communal obligation, fard kifaya. And it's this latter part of knowledge, which is fard kifaya, that the Imam divides into knowledge which is shari'i and knowledge which is ghayr shari'i. In other words, sacred knowledge, knowledge of the Shari'ah, and knowledge which doesn't relate to the Shari'ah. And if we want to see what is Shari'ah knowledge, the Imam says, مَا يُسْتَفَادُ مِنَ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ صَلَوَاتُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. Shari'i knowledge is of a type that we acquire from prophets. We don't have access to Allah's intent until and unless a prophet comes and informs us of that intent. Prior to that, we don't know. And anything other than that sits in the category of knowledge which the Imam says is ghayr shari'i. And this category, he says, is of three types. You have knowledge which is not shari'i knowledge, which is of three types. It's either mahmud, it's praiseworthy. It's either mubah, which is that it's okay. I don't want to say permissible. It's neutral valued. Or something which is madhmoom. Now, as you know, these categories, this value scale of halal and haram, or mahmud or madhmoom, which is blameworthy, praiseworthy, permissible, disliked, etc., sunnah. It's a value scale, but really it's a scale which is defining our character values. That's why it's there. It's not just a mere legal category that you engage in a form of action which is permissible and in fact the Imam's going to come on to this in a moment. It's telling us what sort of person we are. Are we a mubah type person? That's what the sorts of things that we want to do. Or are we just a purely interest in fard? Sunnah doesn't really matter. Wali'adhu billah. Or okay, makruh is okay for me as well. It's not the act. The act is unimportant in that sense. It's really telling us about ourselves. What sorts of acts do we wish to engage in? So the first type of knowledge, which is mahmud, praiseworthy, which is غير shari, and it's not legal knowledge, not sacred knowledge, is that type of knowledge that relates to our worldly affairs. But our worldly affairs insofar as it allows the functioning of society. Without this, we wouldn't be able to function. What sorts of knowledge are they? Knowledge of medicine, for example, or mathematics, and other such things. Now, this type of knowledge, the Imam says, is fard kifaya. That's how it relates to the actual larger topic. This knowledge, which is not Shari'i knowledge, it's praiseworthy, and not only praiseworthy, it's a fard kifaya. That you have to have a sufficient number of people in the community that are doctors, and he'll tell us why we need mathematicians in a second. Because without them, the smooth functioning of society won't happen. Now someone can ask the question, how do we come to know? What's the criterion for knowing what we need? When does knowledge which is not shari'i, which is praiseworthy, become a fard kifaya? Well, we have to look at it in terms of how we understand society to function. It's not, we don't acquire this knowledge just by sitting down and theoretically examining things. No. For instance, let's pretend we could go back to the beginning of time and there was 10 people. Within those 10 people, let's say one became ill. They don't know about cures and illnesses. One person became ill and they're saying, okay, this person doesn't seem too well, we need to do something. They recognize that there's a cure to his illness. They administer the cure, the person becomes better. They realize that we need this. Because without it, if we do nothing, the next person to become unwell, we're just not going to know. Same thing with mathematics. The reason why it's important for us, because many of our masail, our questions and our, in fiqh, our problems in fiqh, in inheritance law, relate to mathematics. Without having people sufficiently trained in that, of course now we know mathematics is the science of the modern world. We live in a mathematical world. The world is mathematical post-Descartes. So the way that we come to know that a type of knowledge is a fard kifaya is by seeing that the absence of that knowledge, will it make us struggle in the functioning of our affairs? Now, this is what Shaykh Yahya was saying earlier on. That's how we as Muslims come to know then what do we need. What's hindering us as a community? Because we can talk about society as a large. Everyone lives in this society, Muslims, non-Muslims, fine. We need doctors, whether they're Muslim, not. We don't go to the GP and say, are you Muslim? No, it doesn't matter. We need to work together in this. But there are some specific things that we will need as a Muslim community, without which our function is going to be all the more difficult. Now, all the complaints that we have, what we now need to do is sit down and write them on a piece of paper. We don't have a voice, we're overpowered, our depiction on the media is not, you can go on and on and on, make a huge long list, and now we can determine, okay, how can we rectify that through knowledge? What sorts of people do we need to produce that can fill that gap such that we are not harmed as a Muslim community anymore? All of those forms of knowledge become fard kifaya, according to what the Imam is saying. Why? Because our affairs in the world become difficult without them. And then we have what the Imam refers to as knowledge which is ghayr shari, and it's permissible. And he says, it's an example he gives is poetry. As long as the poetry has no vulgarity to it, because sometimes poetry unfortunately can be vulgar, but he's saying no, as long as the poetry is not vulgar. And another example he gives, he says general history, just knowing about general history. It's neither praiseworthy, neither blameworthy. If you want to know, now of course, if if you're engaging in historical study for a purpose that's good, it will move from that category to the category of being praiseworthy. And then the blameworthy type of knowledge, which is غير شرعي, is magic. Because magic is a type of knowledge. Or talismans, or the type of knowledge that the Imam refers to as separating a man from his wife. So these are all types of knowledge that the Imam says are not shari'i items of knowledge. But then he presents a really interesting distinction in shari'i knowledge. Because we would think that it's just one idea, shari'i knowledge. But no, even here he says there's a type of knowledge which is shari'i, but it's mahmud, and there's another type which is madhmoom. And that's when you read it for the first time, you think that's really strange, because how can you have a type of knowledge which is shari'i, relates to our sacred law, relates to that which is given to us by the prophets from Allah, and it can have any aspect of dham, blame, censor? What the Imam says is that no, all knowledge that comes from the Shari'ah is mahmud. There is not a single aspect of knowledge that relates to the Shari'ah that's not, every part of it is mahmud. But he says that there's a type of knowledge, ma yudhannu annahu al-mahmud. That ma yudhan annahu shari'i, walakinnahu ghayr shari'i. That we may think it's a type of shari'i knowledge, but in fact it's not. That's why magic and talismans don't come under this category. Why? Because they are evidently not shari'i knowledge. But this knowledge that the Imam is speaking about refers to knowledge that we may think is shari'i knowledge, but isn't. And hence he needs to speak about it so we don't go near it, because we can become confused. But he's going to get to that, I think, in the next chapter after this one. Returning to the type of knowledge which is praiseworthy, the Imam says that we have to look at it as being divided into 4 categories. It has what he calls usul, it has what he calls furu', muqaddimat, and mutammimat. Now, before looking at what each of these means, we can very briefly say that the usul are essentially, and this is just to make clear, it's not a translation, just getting the idea going. The usul are the foundations. It's upon which everything else is built. The furu', the second category, are literally what branches from the furu', what comes off it. The muqaddimat, the third type, or the third category, is what we would term in pedagogy, propadeutics. What we need as a necessary prerequisite for something. And again, we'll speak about it in a moment. And the third is a mutammimat, which are that type of activity that a student of knowledge will engage in once the first 3 have been mastered. Because the Imam is very clear, you can't go on to the next until you've really understood the first, and the second, and the third, and then you go on to the fourth, and we'll speak about what the fourth is. But let's look at the first one, the usul. The Imam says that these are 4. The foundations from which we take our knowledge are 4. The Kitab of Allah, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. These are self-evident, we don't need to speak about why they are. Okay, just when I say that, I don't want to say that there's not a discussion here. There's a lot of discussion here, but I'm saying the fact that they are doesn't require proof. Then ijma', that's the third. Now, ijma' it's a deep spiritual state. If you were to ask someone what ijma' is, they'll tell you, ijma' is consensus. It's when the scholars of a given time agree on a matter of law. When scholars of a given time agree on a matter of law, you say, there's ijma', there's consensus, and that becomes a part of law. We don't want to look at it like that. That is the case, of course it is. But it's also a deeply spiritual state. Now you might quite rightly ask me how. we need to look at it as something which is divinely mandated and divinely inspired. We have to look at it as one of Allah's, it's a part of inayah, His divine care for this ummah. When an individual of great intellect, when an individual of great intellect, through his or her own reasoning, with the possibility of arriving at different possible conclusions, so they're using their great intellect and the conclusions that present themselves, because when you're dealing with something that's probabilistic knowledge allows for there to be multiple conclusions. It could be this, it could be this. It's based on a strength of evidence. So when an individual exercising their great intellect with the possibility of arriving at various conclusions but arrives at one. So we have one person using their great intellect arrives at one conclusion. Fine. And then this happens to every single mujtahid, legal scholar of the first rank, where a multitude of the greatest intellects with a multitude of potential conclusions converge on the one exact same conclusion. This breaks the norm. This isn't ordinarily the case. And we can even go as far as saying that this is a mu'jiza. Why? Because it's so counterintuitive. If 10 of us in this room just got together to say, discuss a particular matter, what's required for the Muslims in England, we'll all have different opinions. Right? What we have for dinner is hard enough. I mean, it's impossible for people endowed and possessed of intellect to agree on things that are open to disagreement. Of course, we can't disagree about what's the color of this sofa. We're all going to say brown, and if someone says it's green, well, nashuk fihi. There's some doubt with this person's vision, maybe. We're not talking about those sorts of things, because there's a one set answer to the question, what's the color of this sofa? No, we're speaking about those scenarios where there isn't one answer. There are equally possible answers. And it shouldn't be the case that people that are endowed with intellect, especially high levels of skill in their intellectual capacity to reason, that they all agree on the same thing. That's almost an impossibility. It can't happen. The fact that it does, it's a miracle. And so to truly understand this idea, we have to understand ijma not just as a discussion in sacred law. To see things in this narrow lens is, as far as I can see, is inaccurate. Why? Because when we look at things in this way, it's because there's a disconnect from the celestial realm. We've become distant from those people who wander in that realm. If the true mujtahids, the true imams of this ummah, the greatest legal minds, as Imam Ghazali mentions, in fact, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, in a few pages he mentions them all. The true mujtahids of this ummah are the ulama of the akhirah. They're not ulama of the dunya. And because they are ulama of the akhirah, the agreement that occurs between their immense intellects is a celestial affair, not a worldly one. Because I shouldn't agree. Their agreement is a sign that Allah has created agreement and concord between their minds in another realm, and is manifesting in the world. And Imam is going to come back to this point in just one moment. So there's three. We have the Kitabullah, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, Ijma, and the Athar al-Sahaba. Because the Sahaba are the ones who witness revelation, and they understand the deployment of Islam, the lived reality of Islam, better than anyone else does. So we refer to the Sahaba because it refers to the understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah. And likewise for Ijma, it's an understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah. Then the second of the four, we had the usul, the foundations, the principles. The second is the furu'. Literally the branches. It's not a translation, just to make that clear. The important thing is what's included in this category. And the Imam tells us it's essentially the subject that we refer to as fiqh. But he mentions something that's so striking. He says, and the ulama of fiqh are the ulama of dunya. Let's make one thing very clear here. Imam al-Ghazali is a first-rank scholar. He's only below Imam Shafi'i. He's mujtahid fil madhab. He is of the greatest standing in the Shafi'i school. In usul al-fiqh, rarely will you come across a person who is as proficient and expert in his field than Imam Ghazali in usul al-fiqh. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bay, Allah yahfadhu, Shaykh Hamza mentioned that if you could take one book to a desert island, which one would it be? He said al-Mustasfa of Ghazali. No? So he's a first-rank legal scholar, first-rank legal theorist, and many other things, right? So it's not that he's saying, oh, I'm critiquing a group of people and I'm not really one of them. No, he's at the foremost, at the head of them. But he's saying that the fuqaha, legal scholars, are ulama dunya. You think, whoa, what does that mean? So we'll come back to that in a moment. And then the third part of the ʿUlum al-Shari'ah are the muqaddimat. And these are sciences such as all the language sciences. Why? Because revelation is given to us how? In a language. A language has rules. A language conveys meaning in a certain way. We need to understand how language conveys meaning. We need to understand the rules with which language is constructed. It's not that we need these sciences in and of themselves, but because they allow us to understand revelation which is given to us in language. Because of that, we have to have a science that understands grammar, which is nahu, sarf, balagha, syntax, morphology, and rhetoric. And we must have other sciences such as logic, because logic is the science of reasoning, correct reasoning, I should say. And these are what the Imam refers as the muqaddimat. You have to have these as a propedeutic prior to even engaging in any knowledge. You have to understand these sciences so you can understand the Quran. You need to engage in learning language so you can engage in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah. So you have the usul, the furu', the muqaddimat, and then the mutammimat. And the mutammimat are essentially the broader theoretical aspects of our tradition, which includes things, sciences such as usul al-fiqh, where deep theory is worked out in how we're able to understand the Quran. Things such as al-nasikh wal-mansukh, wal-aam, wal-khas, wal-zahir, wal-mujmal, and nas, and all these different ideas in usul al-fiqh, they are constructed in the mutammimat. Now the reason why the Imam calls it mutammimat, and of course Allah knows best, is because they're not something that you study at the beginning. They're not muqaddimat. You don't say to a student of knowledge, okay, first day today, let's open a book of legal theory. They have no understanding of that. They have to understand substantive law first. Right? Because the difference in that sense between a faqih and an usuli is that the faqih is the one who is given the principles and derives the rulings. The usuli, the theorist, is the one who constructs the principles. Right? That's what the usuli does. He constructs the principles. The faqih takes those principles and understands, how do I now build law on these principles? He doesn't put the principles down. Yes, you have scholars like Ghazali and Juwayni and others who are dual functioned in that sense. They are both legal theorists as well as being legal scholars. But that's rare. So that's what the mutammimat are, that it's the higher theoretical aspect of our tradition, of our knowledge tradition. Now let's come back to the question that I think we're all eager to hear about, which is, why does the Imam consider the fuqaha to be the ulama ad-dunya? Now there is in fact I don't think I should tell you, but there is an incorrect translation of this where it says that they are the leaders of the world, or they are the scholars, the true scholars. It clearly doesn't mean that, right? But neither does it mean that they are ulama ad-dunya, that they're chasing the dunya. It doesn't mean that either. So neither does it mean that they're the leaders of the world, neither does it mean that they are the ones who are chasing the world. Yani ulama ad-dunya. It's like a pejorative way of speaking about someone. Oh, that alim is alim ad-dunya. He doesn't care about anything. Right? It doesn't mean that. What the Imam says about the ulama, the fuqaha as ulama ad-dunya, is that a science which is as noble as fiqh, the Imam wants us to think about those things which are sacred. Because fiqh, if you ask every one of us in this room, is fiqh a sacred activity? Everyone's going to say, yes, of course they are. Right? But the Imam wants us to think about even those things which are sacred, because by not thinking about them in a deep way, there is a possibility that our nafs interferes and makes the activity of fiqh one more concerned with ourselves and the sacred. In other words, it becomes about me, the faqih, as opposed to the intent behind God's law. That's not what fiqh is about. Because we could easily say, let's go and study fiqh for 10 years. But because our minds have already told us that it's a sacred science, it follows that you will be sacred. No, the Imam's saying, be careful. If you come between that, i.e. your nafs, our nafs comes between that, it becomes me, the faqih, not Allah's law. It's a very subtle distinction that the Imam's trying to make. He's saying you have to think about sacred sciences as much as you have to think about those which are evidently not sacred, because it's easy why we don't engage or don't want to engage with them. And so what we can see is that as many of the divisions of fiqh, there are many divisions of fiqh. We have ibadat, worship and mu'amalat, and fiqh that relates with governance or state, etc. That the one that contends most evidently with actions that relate to the akhirah is when the faqih is looking at either matters that relate to Islam or matters that relate to the prayer and zakah, or matters that relate to the halal and haram. Because when you think about al-Islam and as-salah wa zakah, as well as halal wa haram, these are the most evidently closest parts of fiqh to the akhirah. So if he can show you that these three aspects of fiqh are also part of the dunya, it follows a fortiori that any other division of fiqh is even more distant. There's no need for him to discuss that. So the first thing that the Imam says is that let's look at Islam. Now, what does a faqih do here when someone says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? What does he do? He says, Na'am, hadha Muslim. That this person is now a Muslim. According to the faqih, this person has now become, in sacred law, inviolable. Their property is untouchable. Everything about this person is off limits. But whether someone's heart actually believes sits entirely outside the remit of the faqih. He doesn't know that. Right? He can just pronounce judgment on what he hears of the tongue, of the outward form of the dunya. That's it. If you take the salah, the prayer, someone could perform the prayer and the outward form of the prayer is perfect. Straight back, when you're bowing, you're at the 90-degree angle, your ruku is perfect, right? And the faqih will look at this and he'll determine that the prayer is valid. In sacred law, the prayer is valid. However, whether the prayer contained anything of the akhirah sits outside the remit of the faqih. We could enter the prayer, say Allahu Akbar, and from the moment that we enter the prayer to the moment that we say Assalamu alaikum, we could be, as the Imam says, and literally the Imam says, you could be thinking about the suq, about the market. You could be thinking about your business affairs. You could be doing your accounting in your head. But outwardly you're performing the prayer. The faqih is looking at that saying it's valid. But the affair that makes the prayer is not the affair of the faqih. This is why if we look at the books that the ulama really spend time on, it'll take you an hour to 2 hours, depending on how slow or fast you want to go, to learn the ahkam of fiqh. for salah. If you want to know how to pray, it'll take you not long at all. That is making our prayer valid in a legal sense. But how long will it take to make our prayer valid in an akhirah sense? And that's where you see that the A'imma, they focus on the vertical aspect of our prayer. So for instance, we have books like Riyadh al-Salihin of al-Imam al-Nawawi. It's all about verticality. How do you align yourselves to the divine? How do you make your actions accord with the purpose that those actions are meant to be for? Right? Because the outward form is easily acquirable. And the Imam is repeatedly telling us, it's not about that, it's not about that. It's about this thing that sits behind it. But he does say that, how about if the faqih, which is possible, speaks about khushu' in the prayer? An interesting concept, you often hear about this idea. How do I achieve khushu'? A state of presence, a state of attentiveness in the prayer. That's an entirely incorrect way of looking at that idea, because there is no khushu' inside the prayer if we have no khushu' outside the prayer. Because khushu' inside the prayer is a consequence of your khushu' outside the prayer, not the other way around. It's almost schizophrenic to look at it a different way. That I'm outside the prayer, doesn't matter if I have a good opinion of someone or don't have a good opinion, and someone cuts me up on the road and I beat my horn and I can't wait 10 minutes in the queue, I start getting anxious, but in the prayer I have to be present. Okay, how's that even possible for a human being to do that? Khushu' is a consequence of how we live our lives. It comes into the prayer. You can't just make it up in the prayer. But what the Imam is saying, that khushu' in the prayer, if the faqih is talking about khushu' or the presence of the heart in the prayer, these are actions which relate to the akhirah. At that point, the faqih is no longer engaging in fiqh. He has stepped outside his discipline. He's not speaking about fiqh anymore. It's not part of fiqh. There's no bab in fiqh which says khushu'. Have you ever seen that in any books of fiqh? Right. If it does, it's not fiqh. It's an addendum or an appendix or a footnote. And likewise, he says that if you look at something so noble as wara', which is being scrupulous, give and take, that there is only one particular type of wara' that concerns the faqih, because there's many different ways that a human being can be scrupulous. And that is in relation to whether or not someone can be taken as being an upright witness in court. Because they say, let's say you take a person and say, can this person be a witness in a court of law? And they'll say, is he known to have wara'? And they'll say yes. But if they say no, they'll say, well, how do you know that? They'll say, because he has been seen to engage in haram outwardly. As soon as someone has been seen to engage in haram outwardly, the aspect of wara' drops. He may have wara' in his heart, but outwardly as a witness, he's not someone that can be accepted. It works very similarly in modern English law as well. The admissibility of a particular witness. If someone is not of upright standing, the first thing a lawyer is going to go after is your standing. If they can show the jury that you're a liar, you've under oath you've misled the court, no one's going to take you seriously, right? That doesn't mean that you're not an honest person, really, but we can only judge by the zahir. So that's the aspect of the faqih, that he says, okay, this part of wara', of being scrupulous, I can say something about it, because this person has outwardly done something which debars this person from being a witness. But how about other types of wara'? The Imam says there's a wara' of the salihin, which is when someone is cautious in relation to shubuhat, things which are doubtful, grey areas. That's the wara' of a salih. Now how does the faqih know that? Or the wara' of a muttaqi, which is to forego something that is completely halal out of fear that in a secondary or maybe distant sense it may possibly lead to haram. So it's not even the muttaqi is not even foregoing the haram, the doubtful or the doubt causing. He's foregoing that which is permissible out of fear that in some distant sense it may lead them to haram. So an example, someone comes to you and says, I need to speak to you about someone. It's a really important topic that I need to discuss with you. And you say, okay. And you start speaking to that person, and very quickly it descends into ghiba. What started out as nasiha has now become ghiba. What started out as one of the most noble acts of giving someone counsel has now become haram. So you said, no, I don't want to listen. Why? Because you have to put parameters in place to protect yourself. I will listen to you in the presence of the person that you want to speak about. In the absence of that person, I'm not having this discussion. Or if you want to speak about, don't mention anyone's name and don't even indicate anything that I can come to know who this person is. Because we've got a masterful way of speaking about people without mentioning names, whilst specifically pinpointing who they are, leaving no doubt at all. It's an amazing human trait, right? So the Imam is saying, no, this type of wara, the faqih has no business with this. Or the wara of the siddiqeen, which is essentially to turn away from anything, and Shaykh Yasser will speak about this more, anything that turns us away from Allah. The salih is being cautious of the shubuhat. The muttaqi is being cautious of the halal, and the siddiq is being cautious of anything that removes them from Allah. Darajat. And so naturally and this is just the genius of the Imam. You know when someone's a great thinker, when let's say you're having a discussion with someone and they know exactly what question you're going to ask. And they know that when you give your answer to them, this is the objection that they're going to raise. And when you're going to counter that objection, he knows what they're going to come back with. In other words, in his mind, he has completed the discussion. That's a sign of a majestic thinker. Someone for whom the playground of the intellect has been made entirely open and transparent. And you see that. So now he's already putting forth a question. He says, I know what you're going to ask me. How can it be that the fuqaha, the very people that are taken to be at the pinnacle of representation or representatives of Islam, that you're saying that they're the ulama of dunya? How is that possible? How can it be that those scholars who are so well known to us, you're saying that these exact same scholars are the ones that are actually scholars, or scholars of the dunya in the way that he just spoken about, that their discipline doesn't concern anything apart from the outward, not the inward. That's what he means by dunya. Not that they're corrupt. They could be, but that's not what he means by dunya here. And so what does the Imam say to that? That why have you placed them so low? He says, look, don't forget that the Sahaba, the reason why they were, and do we speak about the Sahaba except to say that they're the greatest people to ever walk this earth? There's no one like the Sahaba. Right? He says, is it because they were known for their fiqh or known for their theology? No. The Imam says that, take Sayyidina Abu Bakr, the Siddiq, radiyallahu anhu, he says that it's not that he was known on account of the immensity of his religious practice, fasting and prayer and fatwa, and no. He said it's on account of something that Allah placed in his heart. That's what they say. That Allah wada'a fi qalbihi shay. That's what they say Abu Bakr said, Sayyidina Abu Bakr had, and which we know from the account of the Prophet ﷺ. And so what Imam Ghazali is saying is that, why are you then searching for the fiqh? You should be searching for the secret that was in his heart. It's not the fiqh that he was known for. I mean, how many fatwa do we know Sayyidina Abu Bakr? Right? Or the Imam says that when the Prophet ﷺ left this world in his physical form and went to Ar-Rafiq al-A'la, that how many companions did he leave behind? Tens of thousands. Right? That not how many amongst them was known to be an expert in theology, like we know about. How many of them do we know that gave fatwa? He says, bid'a ashar rajulan, about 10. Of the tens of thousands of the Sahaba, about 10 were the ones who gave fatwa amongst them. So what are you saying? That it's on account of how famous the fuqaha are? Like now, what the Imam is saying is that the fuqaha, the reason why we have to take them seriously, because they are the ones who are so well known, right? But before he gives the decisive statement here, he says, let's look at Sayyidina Umar. When he left this world, what did Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu ardah say about him? He said, Mata tis'atu a'shar al-ilm, that 9/10 of all knowledge has left the world today. So it was said to Sayyidina Umar, it was said to him, how can you say that when so many of the greatest Sahaba are still alive amongst us? Sayyidina Ali is still here, Sayyidina Uthman is still here, Sa'ad, Zubayr, Talha, they're all still here. How can you say 9/10 of all knowledge has gone today? And what does he say? He said, I don't mean fiqh. He literally says, I'm not talking about fatwa or legal rulings. He said, I mean knowledge of Allah. That's what's left us today. 9/10 of the knowledge of Allah has left us today. Now, so then he says that to say that it's the ulama are the fuqaha is on account of just the fact that they're well known. He says fa'lam or falyu'lam afwan. فَلْيُعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَا يُنَالُ بِهِ الْفَضْلِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ, that you acquire excellence, merit, superiority with Allah, that's one thing. وَمَا يُنَالُ بِهِ الشُّهْرَ عِنْدَ النَّاسِ شَيْءٌ آخر, that you acquire popularity amongst people based on something, and you acquire a rank with Allah based on something else entirely. And they're not always linked. Sometimes it's the case with the great Imams, whereby someone, due to their intense religious practice, the zahir as-salah and taqwa, that they become known. Sayyidi Habib Umar, mathalan, Allah yahfazuhu, the great Abdal al-Sham, you look at them and people repent. So they are well known in the world and they're well known in the heavens. But what the Imam is saying is, it's no standard to say, it's no criterion to judge whether something should be taken as being the pinnacle of knowledge, just the fact someone is well known. Because to be well known is on account of one thing, and to have merit with Allah is another thing entirely. So don't think that the fuqaha, just because they're well known today, that's the barometer by which we judge all other knowledge. No. And then he just says there, just to finish, that how about then the great A'imma, Imam Shafi'i and others? He says that you're forgetting one important thing about these Imams. They are as well known for their fiqh as they are for their tasawwuf. And what the Imam in fact does, he spends the next few pages, page after page, just speaking about mathalan al-Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, and just about their acts of worship, not their fiqh. He says mathalan that Imam Shafi'i كان يقسم الليل ثلاثة أجزاء, ثلثا للعلم وثلثا للعبادة وثلثا للنوم. He used to divide his night into 3 parts: a third for knowledge, a third for worship, and a third for sleep. Now, that the great Rabi' said about Shafi'i, that he would complete an entire Quran in Ramadan 60 times. 60 times. And in his prayer. Sorry. You know, it says وَذَلِكَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ. So what he's saying is that, look, these imams, you're speaking about them because you think they were great fuqaha. They are. But don't forget that they are also people of the akhirah, the ilm tariq al-akhirah. So he's trying to put everything in its place. Now, I know there's going to be a question for me later on from Shaykh Yasser, so it's better I answer it now, which is, he mentions the same thing about the ulama of kalam. But kalam is a very complex issue. But all I will say here is that whatever the Imam says about fiqh applies equally, if not more so, to kalam, the theologians, if not more so. But the complexity arises in how kalam serves a function in deen, just as fiqh serves a function in deen. So don't let it be thought that just because I'm not saying anything about kalam, that no, the kalam scholars are not discussed by the Imam. They are. He says exactly the same things about them as he does about the ulama or the fuqaha of the ulama. So inshallah we'll stop here.
وجد بالنوال منه إلى